I always thought betrayal would taste bitter, like medicine forced down your throat. Instead, it tasted like the vanilla frosting on my graduation cake, sweet on my tongue while my world crumbled around me. My name is Alexandria Rivers, and I was 22 when I learned that some celebrations are just elaborate setups for devastation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of May 15th started like every college graduate's dream. Sunlight streamed through the windows of our family home in Millbrook Heights, casting golden rays across the hardwood floors that my mother, Victoria, had spent hours polishing for today's celebration. The smell of her famous cinnamon rolls filled the air, mixing with the scent of fresh flowers my father, Harold, had arranged in every room. Everything was perfect. Too perfect, as I would soon discover. "Lexi, sweetheart, come down. Your breakfast is getting cold." Victoria's voice carried up the stairs, warm and melodic as always. She had this way of making even the simplest moments feel special, which is probably why I never saw what was coming. I adjusted my cap and gown one final time in the mirror, running my fingers over the golden cords that marked my graduation summa cum laude from Riverside University with a degree in environmental engineering. 4 years of relentless studying, internships, and research projects had led to this moment. More importantly, they had led to my acceptance into the graduate program at Stanford, with a research assistantship that would change everything. The plan was simple and had been discussed countless times over family dinners. I would use my college fund, carefully saved since I was born, now sitting at $127,000, to cover the first year of graduate school while my assistantship kicked in. Then I'd pursue my PhD in renewable energy systems, the field that had captured my heart since my sophomore year, when I'd watched documentaries about climate change until 3 a.m., unable to sleep, knowing what we were doing to our planet. Downstairs, our dining room had been transformed into a celebration space. Balloons in Riverside University's colors, navy blue and silver, bobbed from chairbacks. A banner reading, "Congratulations, Alexandria," stretched across the archway, hand-painted by my younger sister Carmen, who was home from her first year at community college. She'd always been the artistic one in the family, while I was labeled the brain. "There's our Stanford-bound graduate." Harold beamed as I entered, his salt and pepper beard stretching with his wide grin. He wore his best suit, the navy one he reserved for church and special occasions, and had even polished his wedding ring until it gleamed. Everything about this moment screamed love, pride, and celebration. Victoria had outdone herself with the spread. Besides the cinnamon rolls, there were fresh strawberries arranged in a perfect spiral, scrambled eggs with herbs from her garden, and crispy bacon that made my mouth water. The coffee was in her good china, the set with tiny roses that belonged to my grandmother before her. "I can't believe my baby is going to Stanford," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "When you were little, you used to build these elaborate structures with your blocks, always trying to make them better for the earth," you'd say. "Remember the solar panel you tried to make out of aluminum foil when you were 8? I laughed, settling into my chair and reaching for the orange juice. "And you kept it on the windowsill for 3 months, pretending it was working." "It was working," Harold interjected with mock seriousness. "Just not the way you expected." Carmen bounced in her seat, her curly hair still messy from sleep. "Tell them about the acceptance letter again. I want to hear about the research project with the wind turbines." So I did, for probably the 10th time, explaining how Dr. Morrison had personally invited me to join his renewable energy lab, how the assistantship would cover my tuition and provide a modest living stipend, and how this opportunity could lead to groundbreaking research in sustainable technology. My parents listened with the kind of attention that made me feel like the most important person in the world. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart," Victoria said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Your father and I always knew you'd do something amazing." Harold nodded enthusiastically. "Remember when she won the state science fair in high school? I told you then, Vicky, our Lexi is going to change the world. The conversation flowed easily as we ate, touching on everything from my graduation ceremony that afternoon to my plans for moving to California in August. Victoria had already started a list of things I'd need for my apartment, and Harold was researching the best routes to drive my belongings across the country. Speaking of Stanford, I said, taking a sip of coffee, I should probably call the financial aid office next week to confirm everything about accessing the college fund. I want to make sure the transfer goes smoothly before I start looking for apartments in Palo Alto. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Harold's fork paused midway to his mouth, and Victoria's smile flickered like a candle in wind. Carmen, oblivious to the sudden tension, continued chattering about graduation party plans. Well, Harold cleared his throat, setting down his fork with deliberate care. Actually, sweetheart, your mother and I need to discuss something with you about that. My stomach clenched, though I couldn't yet put my finger on why. Discuss what? It's my fund, right? The one you've been contributing to since I was born? Victoria and Harold exchanged a look. One of those married couple communications that happen in split seconds but carry the weight of entire conversations. It was the same look they'd shared when they told me we couldn't afford the family vacation to Yellowstone when I was 16. The same look when Harold lost his job at the engineering firm 3 years ago. Of course it's your fund, honey, Victoria said quickly, but her voice had taken on that artificially bright tone she used when she was about to deliver bad news. Well, there have been some developments. The cinnamon roll in my mouth suddenly tasted like cardboard. What kind of developments? Harold straightened in his chair, his businessman posture replacing the relaxed father figure from moments before. Your mother and I have been doing some thinking about your future, about what's really best for you in the long run. Harold, Victoria warned quietly, but he pressed on. The thing is, Lexi, we've decided that maybe Stanford isn't the right choice after all. Graduate school is expensive, even with the assistantship, and there's no guarantee of job security in research. We think you should consider more practical options. The words hit me like physical blows. Practical options? Dad, this is Stanford. This is my dream. We've been planning this for years. Dreams change, sweetheart, Victoria said softly. Sometimes what we think we want isn't what's best for us. I stared at them both, my brilliant, supportive parents who had just become strangers across the breakfast table. Outside, I could hear the neighbors starting their lawnmowers, the sound of a normal Saturday morning in a normal world where parents didn't ambush their children on graduation day. What exactly are you saying? I asked, though some part of me already knew. Harold's next words would shatter everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and the people I trusted most in the world. But in that moment, sitting in our perfect dining room with the graduation banner overhead and the taste of celebration still on my tongue, I was still their beloved daughter who was going to change the world. I had no idea I was about to change theirs instead. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We've frozen your college fund, Harold said, the words falling like stones into still water. Effective immediately. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Carmen's fork clattered against her plate, and Victoria reached for her coffee cup with trembling hands. I sat there, processing the words but unable to make them make sense. Frozen, I repeated slowly. What do you mean, frozen? We've moved the money into a restricted account, Victoria explained, her voice barely above a whisper. You can't access it right now. The room started to spin slightly. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white. Can't access it. It's my money. My college fund. You've been telling me my entire life that this money was for my education. And it still is, Harold said quickly, just not for this education. This education? My voice cracked on the words. This is Stanford, Dad, Stanford. The opportunity of a lifetime. The research assistantship with Dr. Morrison that you helped me celebrate when I got it 3 months ago. Carmen finally found her voice. Mom, Dad, what's going on? This is Lexi's graduation day. Why are you doing this now? Victoria shot her younger daughter a look that said, "Not now," but Carmen pressed on. "She's been working toward this for years. You guys have been so proud." "Carmen, please," Harold interrupted. "This is between your sister and us." I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "No, it's not just between us. You waited until today, graduation day, to drop this bomb. Why now? Why today of all days?" The silence stretched until Victoria finally spoke. "Because we hoped you'd come to your senses about graduate school on your own. We thought maybe after 4 years of college you'd want to start earning money, start building a real life." "A real life?" I stared at my mother in disbelief. "Environmental engineering isn't a real life? Research that could help save the planet isn't real?" Harold leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "Sweetheart, you're 22 years old. You should be thinking about marriage, about giving us grandchildren, about settling down. This research fantasy." Fantasy? The word exploded out of me. "I graduated summa cum laude. I have a full research assistantship. Companies are already interested in my undergraduate thesis on wind energy efficiency. This isn't a fantasy, it's my career." "Careers in research don't pay well," Victoria said quietly. "You'll struggle for years, maybe decades, chasing grants and hoping for tenure. We don't want that life for you." I walked to the window, looking out at the perfectly manicured lawn where I'd played as a child, where I'd set up my first science experiments, where I'd dreamed of making discoveries that would change the world. Everything looked the same, but nothing would ever be the same again. "How much?" I asked without turning around. "What?" Harold's voice was cautious. "How much money are we talking about? How much have you frozen?" The pause told me everything I needed to know before Victoria answered. "All of it. The entire $127,000. I turned back to face them, and something inside me shifted. The devastating hurt began to crystallize into something harder, sharper. All of it, my entire future, just frozen. "We're not saying never," Harold rushed to explain. "We're saying not now. Take a year, get a job with your engineering degree, see what the real world is like. If you still want to pursue graduate school after that, what? You'll graciously allow me to access my own money." My voice was calm now, dangerously calm. "The money that was specifically saved for my education?" Carmen looked back and forth between us like she was watching a tennis match. "This is insane. Lexi, they can't just steal your money." "They're not stealing it," I said, still looking at my parents. "They're controlling it. There's a difference, legally speaking." Victoria flinched at the word legally. "Sweetheart, please don't talk like that. We're your parents. We love you. We want what's best for you." "What's best for me?" I repeated slowly. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You think what's best for me is to abandon my dreams, give up on Stanford, and what exactly? Find a husband and start popping out babies?" "Don't be dramatic," Harold said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Dramatic?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm being dramatic? You ambushed me on my graduation day, stole my future, and I'm being dramatic?" "We didn't steal anything," Victoria protested. "The money is still there, still yours. We're just providing guidance." Guidance. I tasted the word like poison. Is that what we're calling financial manipulation now? The room fell silent except for the relentless ticking of the grandfather clock. I looked at my parents, really looked at them, and saw strangers wearing familiar faces. The people who had raised me, encouraged my dreams, celebrated my achievements, had just revealed themselves to be something else entirely. "There's something else, isn't there?" I asked, the pieces clicking together in my mind. "This isn't just about marriage and grandchildren. What's the real reason?" Harold and Victoria exchanged another one of their looks, and I knew I'd hit the target. "Tell me," I demanded. Victoria's composure finally cracked. "Your cousin Blake needs help with his business. Your Uncle Robert's construction company is struggling, and Blake's trying to get it back on track, but they need capital. The final piece fell into place with devastating clarity. You're giving my college fund to Blake. We're investing it, Harold corrected quickly. In the family business. When it turns around, you'll get your money back with interest. Blake, I said slowly, who dropped out of college twice. Blake, who's never held a steady job for more than 6 months. Blake, who you've always said was finding his way. You're giving my Stanford fund to Blake. He's family, Victoria said desperately, and he has a solid business plan this time. Robert's company just needs a cash infusion to bid on some big municipal contracts. I walked back to the table and sat down, my movements careful and controlled. Carmen reached for my hand, but I pulled away gently. I needed to think clearly, and the rage building inside me was threatening to cloud my judgment. When? I asked. When what? Harold looked confused. When did you make this decision? When did you decide to steal my future and hand it to Blake? 3 weeks ago, Victoria admitted quietly. Robert came to us, explained the situation. The company is about to go under without help, and Blake really believes he can turn it around. 3 weeks ago. While I was finishing my final exams, writing my thesis defense, preparing for graduation, they were planning this betrayal. So when I called you last month, excited about my research position, when I showed you the acceptance letter again, when we celebrated together, I paused, the full scope of their deception hitting me. You already knew you were going to destroy it all. We didn't destroy anything, Harold protested weakly. I stood up again, this time with purpose. Yes, you did. You destroyed my trust, my future, and your relationship with me. Congratulations, you've succeeded beyond your wildest dreams. Lexi, please, Victoria reached for me, tears streaming down her face. Don't say things you can't take back. I looked down at my mother, this woman who had taught me to dream big, to work hard, to believe I could accomplish anything. I'm not the one who said something I can't take back. You did that when you decided Blake's business fantasy was worth more than your daughter's education. I walked toward the doorway, then paused and turned back. By the way, the graduation ceremony is in 4 hours. I assume you'll still be attending, since you've already paid for the photographer and the dinner reservations. Wouldn't want your investment in appearances to go to waste too. As I climbed the stairs to my room, I could hear Victoria sobbing and Harold's low voice trying to comfort her. Carmen's footsteps followed me, but I closed my door before she could catch up. Sitting on my bed, surrounded by Stanford brochures and research papers, I stared at my laptop screen. My acceptance letter was still bookmarked, still promising a future that had just been ripped away from me. But as I looked at my reflection in the dark computer screen, something inside me shifted again. The hurt was still there, raw and bleeding, but underneath it, something else was growing. They thought they knew what was best for me. They thought they could control my future, manipulate my choices, and force me into their vision of what my life should be. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I opened a new browser window and began to type. If they wanted to play games with my future, I'd show them how the game was really played. They'd just made the biggest mistake of their lives, and I was going to make sure they learned exactly how big that mistake was. The graduation ceremony passed in a blur of forced smiles and hollow congratulations. I walked across that stage in my cap and gown, shook the dean's hand, and accepted my diploma while my parents beamed from the audience like nothing had happened. The photographer they'd hired captured every moment. The proud family, the successful daughter, the perfect celebration. All lies wrapped in expensive photo packages. The restaurant they'd chosen for the celebration dinner was Meridian's, the fanciest place in Millbrook Heights. White tablecloths, crystal glasses, and a string quartet playing softly in the corner. The kind of place where appearances mattered more than substance, which seemed fitting given the day's revelations. Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia had joined us, along with my cousin Blake himself. Looking at him across the table, I tried to understand what my parents saw that made him worth destroying my future. Blake was 26, with an easy smile and the kind of casual confidence that came from never really facing consequences. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and he wore an expensive-looking watch that I suspected he couldn't actually afford. To Alexandria, Harold raised his wine glass, our brilliant daughter who's going to take the world by storm. Everyone clinked glasses, and I managed to lift mine with the rest of them. The irony of the toast wasn't lost on me. How exactly was I supposed to take the world by storm when they'd just clipped my wings? "You know," Uncle Robert said, cutting into his steak, "I was just telling Harold earlier how proud we all are of Lexi's practical attitude about her future." Practical attitude. There was that word again. I took a sip of water and waited. Not everyone is level-headed enough to recognize when it's time to be realistic about their goals, Aunt Patricia added, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Some young people get so caught up in their fantasies that they forget about real life. Carmen shifted uncomfortably beside me, but Lexi got into Stanford. "That's not a fantasy, that's real." Blake leaned forward with that charming smile of his. "Oh, absolutely. Stanford's impressive, no doubt. But here's the thing. Lex? Can I call you Lex? Higher education is great, but it's not everything. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is skip the extended childhood and jump into the real world." Extended childhood. I set down my fork carefully. "Blake's absolutely right," Victoria chimed in quickly. "Graduate school is just delaying the inevitable. At some point, everyone has to grow up and face reality." "And what reality is that, exactly?" I asked, my voice perfectly level. Harold cleared his throat. "Well, sweetheart, at 22, most young women your age are thinking about settling down, starting families. Your mother was married at 23, and look how wonderful our life has been." "Different times, though," Uncle Robert interjected. "Today's job market is tough. That's why what Blake's doing with the construction company is so smart. Real skills, real work, real money." Blake nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. While other people are sitting in classrooms, theorizing about renewable energy or whatever, I'm out there actually building things, creating jobs, contributing to the community. Actually building things." I thought about his employment history. Fired from 3 different construction jobs for showing up late, quitting the landscaping business after 2 months because it was beneath him, and his brief stint selling cars that ended when he was caught inflating prices to boost his commissions. "Blake's got such a good head for business," Aunt Patricia gushed. "He's been working with Robert for months now, learning every aspect of the company. He's got ideas that could revolutionize how they operate." "Revolutionary ideas," I repeated. "Like what?" Blake's eyes lit up. "Well, for starters, most construction companies around here are stuck in the past. They bid on small residential projects, maybe a few commercial jobs. But the real money is in municipal contracts, city infrastructure, road maintenance, public buildings. That's where the steady income is." Victoria nodded approvingly. "See how practical he is? He's thinking about long-term stability, not chasing dreams." "The thing is," Blake continued, "to bid on those big municipal jobs, you need capital. You have to show the city that you've got the resources to complete major projects. That's where your parents' investment comes in. It's not just helping family, it's positioning the company for massive growth." Uncle Robert leaned back in his chair. "We've got our eye on a road maintenance contract that could bring in $2 million over 3 years, but we need to show liquid assets of at least $200,000 to even qualify to bid." The pieces clicked together. They needed my $127,000 to pad their books enough to qualify for municipal contracts they might not even win. "What happens if you don't get the contract?" I asked. The adults exchanged glances. "Well," Harold said slowly, "there are other opportunities. The important thing is that Blake is learning the business, gaining real-world experience. Unlike graduate students," Aunt Patricia added with a slight laugh, who spend years studying theories that may never have practical applications. Renewable energy research doesn't have practical applications? Carmen asked, her voice rising slightly. Climate change isn't real? Of course climate change is real, honey, Victoria said soothingly. But let's be honest. One person's research isn't going to solve global warming. Meanwhile, Blake's business will employ dozens of people right here in our community. Blake nodded earnestly. That's exactly it. I'm not saying what Lex was planning to do isn't noble, but at the end of the day, we need pragmatic solutions. We need people willing to do the hard work of building and maintaining the infrastructure we already have. Plus, Uncle Robert added, the construction industry is booming. Even if this particular contract doesn't pan out, there's steady work for years to come. Compare that to academia, where you're competing for scraps of funding and maybe, if you're lucky, you'll get a tenure-track position somewhere. Harold nodded gravely. That's what we keep trying to explain to Alexandria. Graduate school is a gamble with terrible odds. Even if she finishes her PhD, there's no guarantee of employment. At least with a bachelor's degree in engineering, she can get a good job right away. A good job, I said quietly. Doing what, exactly? There are engineering firms all over the state, Victoria said brightly. Environmental consulting, municipal planning, private sector development. You could have a steady income, benefits, security. Security? I repeated. Like the kind of security Blake had at his last 3 jobs? The temperature at the table dropped several degrees. Blake's smile faltered for just a moment before returning full force. Hey, I'm not going to apologize for being selective about opportunities, he said with a laugh. I could have stayed at any of those places, but I was looking for something where I could really make a difference. That's why working with Dad's company is perfect. It's family, it's meaningful work, and it's my chance to really prove myself. Prove yourself with other people's money, I said softly. Alexandria, Harold's voice carried a warning. Blake is family, we help family. You're right, I agreed. We do help family. The question is, when exactly did I stop being family? Aunt Patricia gasped softly. Sweetheart, of course you're family. That's exactly why we're trying to help you see reason. We don't want you to waste years of your life chasing impossible dreams. Impossible dreams, I said, looking around the table at these people who claimed to love me. Like a full scholarship to Stanford for graduate research. Like working with one of the leading experts in renewable energy. Like potentially developing technology that could actually help solve climate change. Those impossible dreams. Now you're being dramatic again, Victoria sighed. One graduate student isn't going to solve climate change, honey. Be realistic. Blake leaned forward again, his expression earnest and condescending. Look, Lex, I get it. When I was younger, I had big dreams too. I was going to be a professional athlete, then a movie producer, then a tech entrepreneur. But at some point, you have to accept that most people aren't destined for greatness. Most people need to find satisfaction in contributing to their communities in smaller, more practical ways. Most people aren't destined for greatness. I repeated his words slowly. Is that what you think about me, that I'm not destined for greatness? The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, Harold spoke. Sweetheart, we think you're wonderful, but we also think you're setting yourself up for disappointment by aiming so high. Better to aim low and succeed than aim high and fail, Uncle Robert added sagely. Plus, Aunt Patricia said, there's nothing wrong with the more traditional path. Marriage, children, a stable job, these things bring real happiness. All this career obsession is a modern invention. Women were perfectly happy for thousands of years without needing to prove themselves in laboratories. Victoria nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Look at me. I never went to graduate school, and I've had a wonderful, fulfilling life. There's so much joy in building a family, creating a home. You're missing out on the best years of your life by burying yourself in books and research. The best years of my life, I said, looking at my mother. You think my early 20s should be spent getting married and having babies instead of advancing human knowledge? I think your early 20s should be spent learning what really matters, she replied. And what really matters is love, family, and stability, not abstract theories about wind turbines. Blake laughed. Wind turbines? See, that's exactly what I'm talking about. While you're studying wind patterns or whatever, I'm building actual structures that people actually use. Roads, buildings, bridges, things that matter in the real world. I looked around the table one more time at these people who had convinced themselves they were saving me from my own ambitions. They genuinely believed they were doing me a favor by destroying my dreams. They thought they were protecting me from disappointment by guaranteeing I'd never have the chance to succeed. The waiter appeared to refill our water glasses, and I watched the ice cubes settle in my glass like my thoughts were settling in my mind, clear, cold, and sharp. They thought I wasn't destined for greatness. They thought my research was meaningless, my dreams impossible, my ambitions foolish. They thought Blake's sketchy business plan was worth more than my Stanford acceptance. What they didn't know was that while they were sitting here explaining why I should lower my expectations, I was calculating exactly how high I was going to raise the stakes. Let them think I was just another dreamy college graduate who needed to be brought down to earth. Let them believe they were teaching me valuable lessons about reality. I was about to teach them a few lessons of my own about what reality actually looked like when you underestimated the wrong person. The drive home from Meridian's was suffocatingly quiet. Carmen stared out the window while Victoria made small talk about how lovely the dinner had been, how nice it was to see Uncle Robert's family, how proud she was of my maturity in handling everything. Harold nodded along, occasionally glancing at me in the rearview mirror with what I assumed was supposed to be a reassuring smile. I said nothing. There was nothing left to say at that dinner table, and there was nothing left to say in this car. But my mind was racing, calculating, planning. Every condescending word from Blake, every dismissive comment from the adults, every assumption about my supposed limitations was fuel for the fire building inside me. When we pulled into our driveway, I announced I was going for a walk. I need some air to process everything, I said, which was true enough. I just didn't mention that my processing would involve a very specific phone call. The park at the end of our street was empty, except for a few joggers taking advantage of the cooler evening air. I found a bench under an old oak tree and pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Dr. Elena Vasquez. Dr. Vasquez had been my environmental engineering professor for 3 courses, but more importantly, she'd become something of a mentor during my undergraduate years. Unlike the other professors who kept strict boundaries between their academic and personal lives, Elena had always made time for students who showed genuine passion for environmental solutions. She'd written one of my recommendation letters for Stanford, and I knew she had connections throughout the renewable energy industry. More relevant to my current situation, Elena had mentioned several times that she consulted for private companies on environmental impact assessments and sustainability projects. She'd even joked once that she made more from consulting in a month than she did from teaching in a semester. The phone rang twice before her familiar voice answered. Alexandria, how did graduation go? Are you calling to tell me you've changed your mind about Stanford and want to stay here as my research assistant? Her laugh was warm and genuine. Dr. Vasquez, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. The tone of my voice must have conveyed the seriousness of the situation because her laugh faded immediately. Of course, what's going on? I took a deep breath and laid out the entire situation. The frozen college fund, Blake's business plan, the family's expectations that I abandon graduate school for marriage and babies, the assumption that my research dreams were impractical fantasies. Elena listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of disbelief or anger. When I finished, there was a long pause. Those absolute idiots, she said finally, her voice tight with fury. Do they have any idea what they've just thrown away? Alexandria, you're one of the most promising students I've worked with in 15 years of teaching. Your undergraduate thesis on wind turbine efficiency optimization was publishable quality work. Publishable. Most graduate students don't produce research that sophisticated. But they're not completely wrong, are they? I asked. Academic research is competitive, funding is limited, and there's no guarantee of success. Honey, Elena's voice softened, there's no guarantee of success in anything. But you know what is guaranteed? Mediocrity if you accept their vision of your life. You want to know about practical applications? The modifications you proposed to wind turbine blade design could increase energy output by 12%. Do you understand what that means on a commercial scale? I did understand, actually. A 12% increase in efficiency across wind farms could translate to millions of dollars in additional clean energy production annually. Here's what I'm going to tell you, Elena continued, and I want you to listen carefully. You don't need Stanford to succeed, though it would certainly help. You don't need your family's money, though it would make things easier. What you need is determination, intelligence, and the right opportunities. And from where I'm sitting, you have all three. Dr. Vasquez, can I ask you something specific about consulting work? Of course. How long would it take someone with my background to start earning significant income from environmental consulting, assuming they were willing to work extremely hard and had the right connections? There was another pause, and I could almost hear her thinking, are you asking theoretically, or are you asking because you're considering an alternative path? I'm asking because I need to know if it's possible to build something substantial very quickly, something that would prove my family wrong about my capabilities and my field. Alexandria, Elena's voice was careful now, what are you planning? I watched a jogger pass by, her steady rhythm reminding me of the consistency and persistence that had gotten me through 4 years of engineering coursework. I'm planning to show them exactly how wrong they are about everything, about me, about my field, about what's practical and what's not. I see. Another pause. In that case, let me tell you about a client of mine. Meridian Energy Solutions. They're a mid-sized company that specializes in renewable energy installations for commercial and municipal clients. They've been looking for someone to handle their environmental impact assessments and efficiency optimization projects. The pay is excellent. And more importantly, there's potential for performance bonuses based on energy savings you can document for their clients. My pulse quickened. What kind of timeline are we talking about? For someone with your qualifications, you could start within 2 weeks if you were available. And Alexandria, I'm going to be blunt. They're desperate for someone competent. Their last consultant was charging them premium rates for substandard work. If you can deliver what I think you can deliver, they'll pay you whatever you ask within reason. And hypothetically, if someone wanted to eventually start their own consulting firm? Elena laughed, but it was a different kind of laugh now. Excited? Conspiratorial. Hypothetically, someone could use a position like this to build a client base, develop a reputation, and accumulate the capital needed to go independent. Hypothetically, someone brilliant and motivated could be running their own firm within a year or two. I closed my eyes and let the possibilities wash over me. While Blake was trying to convince my parents to invest in his pipe dream of municipal contracts he wasn't qualified to handle, I could be building a real business based on actual expertise and measurable results. Dr. Vasquez, I need to ask you for a huge favor. Name it. I need you to help me accelerate my timeline. I don't want to wait 2 weeks to start. I don't want to spend months building up credibility. I need to hit the ground running and start generating results immediately. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that if Meridian Energy Solutions needs environmental consulting, there are probably a dozen other companies in the region with similar needs. I'm thinking that with the right approach, I could be consulting for multiple clients simultaneously within a month. That's ambitious. It's also risky. You'd essentially be starting your own firm from day one instead of building experience first. Risk, I repeated, thinking about Blake's confident smile and my father's dismissive toast. Everyone keeps telling me I need to be more realistic about risk. But you know what's really risky? Trusting other people to control your future. Elena was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was serious, but supportive. Alexandria, if you're serious about this, I can make some introductions. I know at least 6 companies off the top of my head that could use your services. But I need to know you understand what you're committing to. Building a consulting business from scratch is incredibly demanding. 16-hour days, constant networking, technical work, business development, client management. It's not like being a student where your only job is to learn. Dr. Vasquez, I said, standing up from the bench and looking back toward my house where my family was probably discussing how mature I'd been about accepting their decision. I've spent the last 4 years preparing for a career in environmental engineering. Today my family told me that my preparations were worthless, my dreams were impractical, and my field was irrelevant. They've challenged everything I am and everything I want to become. I started walking back toward the house, my steps firm and purposeful. I'm not just committing to building a consulting business. I'm committing to proving them wrong about everything. And I'm going to do it faster and more thoroughly than they could possibly imagine. In that case, Elena said, and I could hear the smile in her voice, let me make those phone calls tonight. Can you be available for interviews starting Monday morning? I'll be available for whatever it takes. Good. One more thing, Alexandria. When you succeed, and I believe you will, remember that success is its own reward. Don't let revenge consume the victory. After hanging up, I stood in front of my childhood home and looked up at the lit windows. In there, my parents were probably congratulating themselves on helping me see reason. Blake was probably already spending my college fund in his mind. They all thought they'd taught me a valuable lesson about managing expectations and accepting limitations. What they'd actually done was give me the motivation I needed to exceed every expectation and demolish every limitation they'd tried to impose on me. I walked up the front steps with a smile on my face for the first time since breakfast. Let them think I was devastated. Let them believe I was accepting their wisdom about practical choices and realistic goals. While they were planning Blake's construction business with my money, I was planning something much more ambitious. And unlike their investment in Blake's questionable prospects, my investment in myself was guaranteed to pay off. The only question now was just how spectacular that payoff was going to be. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that seemed to match my newfound sense of purpose. While my family ate breakfast downstairs, I sat in my bedroom putting the finishing touches on a presentation that would either launch my consulting career or prove that I was as naive as they believed. The first interview was at 9 a.m. with Meridian Energy Solutions, the company Dr. Vasquez had recommended. By 10:30, I had a contract for their environmental impact assessments at $125 per hour. By noon, I'd interviewed with Greentech Industries and walked away with a project to optimize their solar panel installations for maximum efficiency. By 2 p.m., Riverside Municipal Authority had hired me to conduct energy audits for their public buildings. 3 clients in one day. 3 separate income streams that would collectively pay me more per month than most people my age made in traditional jobs. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. While Blake needed my college fund to even qualify to bid on municipal contracts, I'd just secured an actual contract with the city based purely on my qualifications and Dr. Vasquez's recommendation. When I came home that evening, Victoria was in the kitchen preparing dinner. "How was your first day of job hunting, sweetheart?" she asked without looking up from the vegetables she was chopping. "Productive," I said, which was technically true. "I've got some promising leads." "That's wonderful. I knew you'd find something suitable once you started looking at realistic options." I nodded and headed upstairs, biting back a smile. If she only knew how realistic my options actually were. The next few weeks fell into a carefully orchestrated routine. Every morning, I left the house dressed in business casual attire, telling my family I was interviewing for entry-level engineering positions at local firms. In reality, I was meeting with clients, conducting site assessments, and building what would become one of the most successful environmental consulting practices in the region. Dr. Vasquez hadn't been exaggerating about the demand for competent environmental consulting. Once word spread about my work, and more importantly about the measurable results I was delivering, The phone calls started coming faster than I could return them. My first major breakthrough came with the Riverside Municipal Authority project. The energy audit I conducted revealed that their buildings were operating at roughly 60% efficiency due to outdated HVAC systems and poor insulation. My recommendations for upgrades would reduce their energy costs by $180,000 annually, while cutting their carbon footprint by 35%. The city manager, James Morrison, called me into his office after reviewing my report. "Ms. Rivers, I've been dealing with consultants for 15 years, and I've never seen analysis this thorough or recommendations this actionable. How quickly can you start implementing these changes?" "Implementation isn't typically part of environmental consulting," I explained. "I assess and recommend, but construction and installation are usually handled by separate contractors." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "What if we wanted to hire you to oversee the entire project? Coordinate with contractors, ensure quality control, guarantee the projected savings." The project management fee he proposed was more than my parents made in 6 months combined. I accepted on the spot. But the real game changer came 3 weeks into my secret career when Dr. Vasquez called with an opportunity that would accelerate my timeline beyond anything I'd imagined. "Alexandria, how would you feel about taking on a project with some serious profile?" she asked during one of our evening check-ins. "Define serious profile." "Pacific Northwest Energy Consortium. They're planning a massive wind farm development, 200 turbines across 15,000 acres. They need someone to handle the environmental impact assessment and efficiency optimization for the entire project." I nearly dropped my phone. "Dr. Vasquez, that's a multi-million-dollar project. They'll want an established firm with years of experience and dozens of employees." "Actually, they want someone brilliant who can deliver innovative solutions without the bureaucratic overhead of a large firm. I may have mentioned your undergraduate thesis on wind turbine efficiency optimization. The Pacific Northwest Energy Consortium contract was worth $350,000 over 6 months. More than twice what my parents had stolen from me, and I'd earn it through my own expertise rather than inherited savings. The only challenge was maintaining my cover story at home. My family continued to believe I was struggling to find appropriate entry-level work, occasionally mentioning job interviews that hadn't panned out or positions that weren't quite the right fit. Meanwhile, I was working 16-hour days split between client sites, technical analysis, and building the business infrastructure I needed to handle my rapidly expanding client base. I rented a small office space downtown under the name Alexandria Rivers Environmental Consulting and hired my first employee, a recent graduate from the business program who could handle scheduling, invoicing, and client communications while I focused on the technical work. The hardest part was hiding my growing success from Carmen, who had moved back home after finishing her first year at community college. She was sharp enough to notice that I was leaving the house early and coming home late every day, always carrying a professional-looking briefcase and occasionally taking calls that sounded distinctly business-related. One evening, she cornered me in my room. "Lexi, what's really going on? You've been acting weird for weeks." I looked at my sister, this person I'd always been close to, and weighed my options. Carmen had been as shocked as I was by our parents' decision about the college fund. She defended me at the graduation dinner and asked uncomfortable questions about the fairness of giving my money to Blake. "Can you keep a secret?" I asked finally. Her eyes lit up. "The biggest secret ever." I showed her my laptop screen, which displayed my business bank account balance, $89,000 in 6 weeks of operation. Carmen stared at the number for a full minute before speaking. "Holy shit, Lexi." "Language," I said automatically, then laughed at the absurdity of worrying about profanity when I was showing her evidence of a rapidly growing business empire. "Is this real? What exactly are you doing?" I explained the consulting work, the client projects, the Pacific Northwest contract that would put me well into 6 figures by year's end. Carmen listened with increasing amazement, occasionally asking technical questions that proved she understood the magnitude of what I was building. "So while Mom and Dad think you're failing to find a decent job, you're actually running a successful business." "Not just successful," I said, pulling up my project pipeline. "Expanding. I've got more work than I can handle, and I'm getting referrals faster than I can follow up on them." Carmen was quiet for a moment, then asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Are you going to tell them?" I closed my laptop and looked at my sister. "Eventually. But not yet. Right now, they're busy explaining to everyone how they helped me see reason about my impractical dreams. Blake's been using my college fund to make deposits on equipment he can't afford, assuming the municipal contracts will come through. Uncle Robert's been telling people about the revolutionary changes Blake's bringing to his business. And meanwhile, you're actually succeeding in the field they said was pointless. More than succeeding, thriving." Carmen grinned. "This is going to be epic when you finally reveal it." Over the following weeks, Carmen became my unofficial confidant and assistant. She helped me maintain my cover story by answering calls from family members when I was in client meetings, occasionally mentioning how hard I was working to find the right opportunity. She also became fascinated by the technical aspects of my work, often staying up late asking questions about renewable energy systems and environmental impact analysis. "You know," she said one night as I was preparing for a presentation to the Pacific Northwest Energy Consortium Board, "I was thinking about switching my major anyway. This stuff is actually pretty interesting." The thought of Carmen joining me in environmental engineering was appealing, but I had bigger concerns at the moment. My business was growing so rapidly that I was approaching a decision point. I needed to either slow down and stay small, or expand dramatically and risk attracting attention. The Pacific Northwest project was scheduled to go public within 2 months, which would mean press coverage and industry recognition. There was no way to complete a project of that magnitude while maintaining my cover story about struggling to find work. But there was also no way I was going to pass up the opportunity. Not when success on this project would establish me as one of the premier environmental consultants in the region. Not when the revenue would allow me to expand into new markets and take on even larger projects. As I drove to the consortium's headquarters for my final presentation, I realized that my secret building phase was about to end whether I was ready or not. Soon, very soon, my family would discover exactly how wrong they'd been about my prospects and my field. The only question was whether I wanted to control the timing of that revelation, or let them discover it accidentally when my name started appearing in industry publications and local business news. Either way, their assumptions about my limitations were about to be shattered in spectacular fashion. The weekly family dinners had become exercises in theatrical performance. Every Sunday, I sat at our dining room table and delivered carefully crafted updates about my supposed job search struggles, while internally calculating the profit margins on my latest consulting contracts. "Any promising interviews this week, sweetheart?" Victoria would ask, her voice tinged with what she probably thought was encouraging sympathy. "A few possibilities," I'd respond, with practiced disappointment. "The market is tougher than I expected. Most firms want someone with more experience for the higher-level positions, but the entry-level jobs don't really utilize my education." Harold would nod knowingly. "That's exactly what we were trying to explain about graduate school. The job market is saturated with overqualified candidates. Sometimes it's better to be practical from the start." Meanwhile, my business checking account had grown to $247,000, I had a waiting list of potential clients, and industry publications were starting to request interviews about my innovative approaches to renewable energy optimization. The charade became even more elaborate when Blake started joining our Sunday dinners to provide updates on his progress with Uncle Robert's construction company. These performances were masterpieces of delusion that I found both fascinating and infuriating. "The municipal contract application is moving through the approval process," Blake would announce, with the confidence of someone who had never actually read the 47-page requirements document. "We should hear back within the next few weeks." What Blake didn't know, but I did, thanks to my work with Riverside Municipal Authority, was that his application had been rejected 2 weeks earlier due to insufficient financial backing and a lack of relevant project experience. The city had specific requirements for previous municipal work that Uncle Robert's residential construction background simply didn't meet. "That's wonderful news," Victoria would gush. "It's so impressive how you've turned the business around." "Well," Blake would say with false modesty, "it's all about having the right vision and the capital to execute it. That investment from Harold and Victoria has been crucial for establishing credibility with the city." I wanted to laugh every time he mentioned credibility. The same week Blake was bragging about his municipal prospects, I was presenting my preliminary findings from the Pacific Northwest Energy Consortium project to a board that included former Department of Energy officials and renewable energy executives from 3 countries. But the most challenging part of maintaining my facade wasn't the family dinners. It was the constant stream of phone calls and opportunities I had to decline or redirect. "Alexandria Rivers Environmental Consulting. This is Alexandria," I answered one afternoon, having ducked into the bathroom at home to take a call from a potential client. "Ms. Rivers, this is David Chen from Green Valley University. We're expanding our sustainability program, and we'd like to discuss having you conduct an energy audit of our entire campus. The project would be worth approximately $180,000. I pressed the phone closer to my ear and lowered my voice. "I'm very interested, Mr. Chen, but I'm not available to discuss details at this moment. Could I call you back within an hour?" "Of course. Oh, and Ms. Rivers, Dr. Vasquez spoke very highly of your work. She mentioned you were instrumental in saving Riverside Municipal Authority nearly $200,000 annually." After hanging up, I stood in the bathroom for a moment, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The person looking back at me was successfully running a consulting business that was being recommended by universities and government agencies. Yet downstairs, my family was probably discussing my need to lower my expectations and consider retail jobs. The cognitive dissonance was becoming almost surreal. The situation became even more complicated when local business publications started taking notice of my work. The Millbrook Heights Business Journal called my office, wanting to feature me in their Rising Entrepreneurs Under 25 Inches issue. The State Environmental Council nominated me for their Innovation in Sustainability Award. I had to decline the Business Journal feature and request that the Environmental Council postpone any public recognition until later in the year. The last thing I needed was my parents opening their Sunday newspaper to find a full-page article about their daughter's thriving environmental consulting firm. Carmen found the whole situation increasingly entertaining. She'd started timing my phone calls and keeping a running tally of the business opportunities I had to decline or defer due to our family's continued ignorance about my actual circumstances. "That's 12 this week," she whispered one evening after I'd politely declined an interview with Regional Energy Today magazine. "How long can you keep this up?" "As long as necessary," I replied, though I was beginning to wonder myself. The pressure to maintain the charade intensified when Harold announced he'd been networking on my behalf with his former colleagues from the engineering firm. "I spoke with Tom Bradley yesterday," he said during one of our dinners. "You remember Tom? He was my supervisor before the layoffs. He thinks there might be an opening for a junior environmental consultant at Morrison & Associates." My heart stopped. Morrison & Associates was one of the firms I'd considered approaching as a potential client. If Harold arranged an interview, I'd be in the impossible position of interviewing for an entry-level job at a company I was qualified to consult for at the senior level. "That's very thoughtful of you, Dad," I managed, "but I'm not sure I'm ready for a consulting position. Maybe something more foundational first." "Nonsense." Harold waved off my concerns. "Tom says they're specifically looking for someone with your educational background. Environmental consulting is exactly what you studied for." The irony was almost too much to bear. My father was trying to help me get an entry-level job in the exact field where I was already earning more than he'd made in his best year at the firm. "I'll think about it," I said weakly. Blake, never one to miss an opportunity to offer advice, leaned forward with his characteristic smirk. "You know, Lex, maybe it's time to be more open to different kinds of opportunities. Sometimes we have to take jobs that aren't perfect to prove ourselves. I looked at Blake. Blake, who was currently using my college fund to lease construction equipment he couldn't afford for contracts he wasn't qualified to complete, and felt my patience finally begin to fray. "You're probably right," I said carefully. "It's important to prove yourself with real, measurable results, rather than just talk about what you're going to accomplish." Something in my tone must have registered because Blake's expression shifted slightly, but Victoria jumped in before he could respond. "See? I knew you'd come around to a more practical perspective. Blake's been such a good influence on all of us about the importance of real-world experience." Real-world experience. I thought about the 847-page environmental impact assessment I'd completed for Pacific Northwest Energy Consortium, the $340,000 in energy savings I'd identified for 3 different municipal clients, and the innovation award I'd had to decline. Yes, I agreed. Real-world experience is definitely important. That night, Carmen helped me calculate my current business valuation based on projected contracts and recurring client relationships. The number was staggering, well into 7 figures if I continued at the current growth rate. "You realize," Carmen said as we looked at the spreadsheet, "you could probably buy Uncle Robert's entire construction company with what you're making." The thought had occurred to me, in fact, several thoughts had occurred to me about what I could do with my growing financial resources and industry connections. Particularly thoughts about municipal contracts and the kinds of projects that someone like Blake could never qualify for, no matter how much of my college fund he burned through. But those were thoughts for later. For now, I had to continue pretending to struggle while actually succeeding beyond my family's wildest imagination. The Pacific Northwest project was scheduled for completion in 6 weeks, at which point my involvement would become public knowledge. Major renewable energy projects always generated press coverage, and lead consultants were inevitably mentioned in the coverage. 6 weeks to maintain the facade. 6 weeks before my family discovered that their practical daughter had built something extraordinary, while they were busy explaining why she should lower her expectations. I was starting to look forward to that conversation almost as much as I was looking forward to my next client meeting. The first crack in my family's carefully constructed reality appeared on a Tuesday morning when Uncle Robert called our house at 7:30 a.m. I was in the kitchen making coffee before heading to a client presentation when Harold answered the phone, his voice still thick with sleep. "Robert, what's wrong? It's barely past 7. From Harold's increasingly tense responses, "What do you mean overdue?" and "How much are we talking about?" I could piece together that Uncle Robert's construction company was facing some kind of financial crisis. After Harold hung up, he sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. Victoria appeared in her robe, immediately sensing the tension. "What's going on?" she asked, pouring herself coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. "Robert's in trouble. The equipment leases Blake arranged are 3 months behind on payments. The suppliers are threatening to repossess everything unless they get $47,000 by Friday." I paused in gathering my presentation materials. 3 months behind? How did it get that bad? Harold looked up at me with exhausted eyes. Blake was supposed to be managing the finances, while Robert focused on operations. Apparently, Blake kept assuring him that the municipal contract payments were coming, that they just needed to bridge the gap for a few more weeks. The municipal contracts that had been rejected months ago. The contracts, I could have told them, were impossible to secure with their current qualifications, if anyone had bothered to ask my professional opinion instead of dismissing my expertise. "Can't Blake cover the payments?" Victoria asked. "He's been so confident about the business prospects." Harold's laugh was bitter. "Blake doesn't have $47,000. Apparently, he's been using the operational funds to lease newer equipment and hire additional crew, anticipating the contract revenue that—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "That isn't coming," I completed quietly. "We don't know that for certain," Victoria said quickly, but her voice lacked conviction. "The city moves slowly on these things. Maybe." Victoria, Harold interrupted gently, I called Tom Bradley this morning. He has connections at the municipal authority. The contracts Blake was counting on were awarded to Brennan Construction 3 weeks ago. The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of Carmen getting ready for her summer job at the local library. I watched my parents process the implications of what Harold had just revealed. So the money we gave Blake, Victoria's voice was barely a whisper, is gone, along with everything Robert had saved for retirement and the business equity he'd built over 20 years. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not guilt exactly, but a recognition of how completely their world was about to unravel. How much did you give Blake? Harold looked at me with shame in his eyes. The full amount, $127,000, plus we co-signed for an additional business loan of $75,000. $202,000, more than my parents' house was worth, more than they could recover from at their age without declaring bankruptcy. The bank is calling the loan due immediately unless Robert can demonstrate stable revenue streams, Harold continued. And with the equipment repossessions looming, they can't take on any new projects. Victoria sat down heavily at the table. What are we going to do? Before Harold could answer, the phone rang again. This time it was Aunt Patricia. And from Harold's side of the conversation, it was clear that she was in full panic mode about the financial crisis threatening to destroy her husband's life's work. As my parents dealt with the immediate family emergency, I quietly gathered my things and headed for the door. I had a presentation to deliver to a renewable energy consortium about optimizing wind farm efficiency, work that would earn me more in one afternoon than Blake had managed to generate in months of burning through my college fund. The drive to my presentation gave me time to process the magnitude of my family's financial disaster. They'd trusted Blake with everything. Not just my college fund, but their retirement security, their creditworthiness, their future. And Blake, with his confident smiles and revolutionary business ideas, had destroyed it all while chasing contracts he was never qualified to pursue. The irony was almost too perfect. While I was being lectured about practical choices and realistic expectations, Blake was gambling with other people's money on fantasies that any competent business analysis would have revealed as impossible. My presentation went flawlessly. The consortium executives were impressed with my efficiency projections and approved the implementation of my recommendations for their newest wind farm. The contract amendment they signed would add another $85,000 to my business revenue over the next 4 months. When I returned home that evening, the atmosphere was funeral quiet. Carmen met me at the door with wide eyes. "It's bad, Lexi," she whispered. "Really bad. Mom's been crying all afternoon. And Dad's been on the phone with lawyers trying to figure out if there's any way to recover the money." I found my parents in the living room, surrounded by financial documents and legal papers. Victoria's eyes were red and swollen, and Harold looked like he'd aged 5 years in a single day. "How are you holding up?" I asked gently. Harold looked up from a bank statement. "We're going to lose the house, Lexi. The second mortgage we took out to help Blake, combined with the business loan we co-signed, we can't make the payments without Robert's company generating income. And Robert's company can't generate income without equipment," Victoria added quietly. "It's a complete disaster." I sat down across from them, carefully modulating my expression to show concern rather than the grim satisfaction I was actually feeling. "What about Blake? Surely he has some responsibility for this situation." Harold's mouth twisted into something resembling a smile. "Blake disappeared yesterday." Patricia called around to his friends. "Apparently, he's taking some time to figure out his next steps somewhere in Colorado." Of course he was. Blake had never faced real consequences for his failures before. Why would he start now, when the stakes were highest? "We should have listened to you," Victoria said suddenly, looking directly at me. "That night, when you asked about giving Haley your college fund, you tried to tell us it was wrong and we didn't listen." "This isn't about Haley," I corrected carefully. "This is about Blake and a business plan that was never realistic." "But we made the same mistake," Harold said heavily. "We took your future and gambled it on someone else's dreams. Just like we did with your cousin, we did with Blake." The comparison wasn't lost on me. My parents had a pattern of sacrificing my opportunities to support family members who had never demonstrated the competence or commitment to deserve that support. Maybe, I said slowly, this is an opportunity to make different kinds of decisions going forward. Victoria looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean, maybe it's time to stop assuming that practical means safe, and dreamy means risky. Maybe Blake's construction fantasy was actually the impractical choice, and my environmental engineering career was the practical one. Harold was quiet for a long moment. You're right, of course. But right or wrong, we still have to deal with the consequences of our choices. And those consequences are going to destroy us financially. Over the next few days, the full scope of the disaster became clear. Uncle Robert's construction company was liquidating its assets to pay creditors. Blake's equipment leases were being repossessed, leaving half-finished projects that Robert couldn't complete. The municipal authority was considering legal action for the abandoned work on a public building renovation that Blake had started but couldn't finish. My parents were facing the loss of their home, their savings, and their retirement security. Aunt Patricia was threatening divorce unless Robert could find a way to recover their losses. The entire extended family was in crisis because of Blake's incompetence and my parents' willingness to enable it. And through it all, I continued my carefully maintained facade of struggling to find appropriate entry-level work while actually running a consulting business that was generating more revenue than Uncle Robert's company had ever achieved in its best years. But the facade was becoming harder to maintain as opportunities kept presenting themselves. Dr. Vasquez called with news that the Department of Energy was interested in funding a research project based on my wind turbine efficiency innovations. A renewable energy investment firm wanted to discuss funding my expansion into solar optimization consulting. Each opportunity I had to decline while my family descended into financial ruin felt like a small betrayal of my own success, but I wasn't ready to reveal the truth yet. Not while they were still processing the consequences of underestimating me and overestimating Blake. Soon, though, very soon, they would learn exactly how wrong they'd been about everything. And when that moment came, I wanted them to fully understand the cost of their choices. Not just the money they'd lost, but the opportunities they'd dismissed, and the daughter they'd underestimated. The irony of their situation was about to become much more pointed than they could possibly imagine. 3 weeks after Blake's disappearance, my business reached a milestone that made maintaining my cover story nearly impossible. The Pacific Northwest Energy Consortium project was completed ahead of schedule, and the preliminary results exceeded everyone's expectations. My efficiency optimizations would save the consortium $2.3 million annually, while increasing their renewable energy output by 18%. The project director, Dr. Sarah Chen, called me personally to deliver the news. Alexandria, these results are extraordinary. We're talking about industry-leading improvements that could revolutionize how wind farms operate. We want to discuss expanding your contract to cover our entire West Coast operation. The expanded contract would be worth $1.8 million over 2 years. More money than most small businesses generate in a decade, and I was being offered it at 22 years old based purely on the quality of my work. Dr. Chen, I'm honored by your confidence, but I need to ask about the timeline for public announcement of these results. Actually, that's part of why I'm calling. The consortium wants to present your findings at the International Renewable Energy Summit next month. Your work deserves recognition, and frankly, we want other industry leaders to know we're working with the consultant who achieved these breakthrough results. I stared out my office window at the city skyline, calculating rapidly. The International Renewable Energy Summit was covered by every major business publication in the country. There was no way to present at that conference and maintain my secret from my family. Dr. Chen, could I have 48 hours to consider the presentation opportunity? The expanded contract is definitely of interest, but I need to manage some scheduling conflicts. After hanging up, I sat in my office chair and finally allowed myself to acknowledge what had been building for weeks. My business had grown beyond the point where secrecy was sustainable. More importantly, it had grown beyond anything my family had imagined possible when they dismissed my dreams as impractical fantasies. My phone buzzed with a text from Carmen. "Emergency family meeting tonight. Dad got more bad news about the house." The contrast was becoming almost absurd. While my family was collapsing financially due to their poor judgment about Blake, I was being invited to speak at international conferences about innovations that could reshape the renewable energy industry. That evening's family meeting was grimmer than I'd expected. Harold had received notice that the bank was accelerating the foreclosure timeline. Without the business loan payments from Uncle Robert's company, they had 6 weeks before losing the house. "I've been looking at our options," Harold said, spreading financial documents across the dining room table. "We could try to sell the house ourselves and maybe break even on what we owe, but that would still leave us responsible for the business loan that Blake defaulted on." Victoria's hands shook as she poured coffee. "Maybe we could declare bankruptcy, start over." At our age, Harold's voice was hollow. "Victoria, we're 54 and 52. Declaring bankruptcy now means we'll never recover financially. We'll be renting apartments and living on Social Security when we're 70. Carmen looked back and forth between our parents with growing alarm. "There has to be something we can do. Some way to get the money back from Blake or Uncle Robert." "Blake's disappeared, and Robert's company is being liquidated to pay creditors," Harold said flatly. "The lawyers said we might recover 15 cents on the dollar if we're lucky. That would give us back maybe $30,000 of the $202,000 we're liable for." I listened to this conversation while mentally reviewing my business accounts. My consulting firm now held $847,000 in liquid assets, with another $2.1 million in confirmed contracts over the next 18 months. I could solve my parents' financial crisis with a single wire transfer and barely notice the impact on my business operations. But I wasn't ready to reveal my situation yet, not while they were still processing the consequences of their choices. They needed to fully understand what their dismissal of my capabilities had cost them before they learned what I'd actually accomplished. "Maybe," I said carefully, "this is a good time to think about what we've learned from this situation." Harold looked up from the foreclosure notice. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we trusted Blake's business judgment over everything else. We assumed that construction work was more practical than environmental research. We believed that his confidence meant competence." I paused. "Maybe our assumptions about what's practical and what's risky were completely backwards." Victoria's face crumpled. "You're saying this is our fault for not supporting your dreams." "I'm saying maybe my dreams weren't as impractical as everyone thought." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock. Finally, Harold spoke. "You're right, Lexi. We made terrible judgments about risk and practicality. But being right doesn't help us now. We still have to deal with the consequences." Over the next few days, I watched my parents scramble to find solutions to their financial crisis. Harold called in favors from former colleagues, trying to find consulting work that could generate enough income to keep them afloat. Victoria researched debt consolidation options and bankruptcy attorneys. Meanwhile, my phone continued ringing with business opportunities. A major solar installation company wanted to discuss a $650,000 consulting contract. The state environmental agency invited me to bid on efficiency audits for all government buildings statewide. A venture capital firm expressed interest in funding my expansion into energy storage optimization. Each opportunity represented more money than my parents could generate in years of traditional employment, yet I was still supposed to be struggling to find entry-level work at $45,000 per year. The cognitive dissonance finally broke when Dr. Vasquez called with news that made continuing my charade impossible. "Alexandria, I have 2 pieces of news for you. First, the Department of Energy approved funding for your wind turbine research project, $2.4 million over 3 years, with you as the principal investigator." I nearly dropped my phone. "Dr. Vasquez, I never applied for Department of Energy funding. I took the liberty of submitting your Pacific Northwest Consortium results as a preliminary research proposal. The DOE is so impressed with your work, that they're offering you a direct funding contract. No university affiliation required. They want to fund you as an independent researcher. The second piece of news was even more dramatic. The International Renewable Energy Summit wants you as their keynote speaker. Not just a presentation about your consortium work, but a keynote address about the future of wind energy optimization. Alexandria, do you understand what this means? You'd be addressing 3,000 industry leaders as the expert on breakthrough renewable energy efficiency. I understood exactly what it meant. It meant my secret was about to become international news, whether I wanted it to or not. Dr. Vasquez, when is the summit? 3 weeks. I know it's short notice, but they've had a keynote cancellation, and after seeing your consortium results, you're their first choice as a replacement. After hanging up, I sat in my car outside my parents' house and finally acknowledged that the revelation phase of my plan was no longer optional. In 3 weeks, my name would be in every renewable energy publication in the world. Major business media would cover the summit. There was no way to deliver a keynote address about breakthrough research while maintaining the fiction that I was struggling to find entry-level employment. More importantly, my family's financial crisis was accelerating faster than I'd anticipated. They had 6 weeks before losing their house, and their stress was becoming genuinely painful to watch. It was time to end the charade. Time to reveal exactly what their practical daughter had built while they were busy explaining why she should lower her expectations. I pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment, looking at the house where I'd grown up, where I'd been dismissed and underestimated and told to be realistic about my limitations. In a few hours, everything my family believed about me, about my capabilities, and about their own judgment was going to change forever. The only question now was whether they'd be relieved by my success or devastated by the realization of how completely wrong they'd been about everything. I was about to find out. I chose Sunday dinner for the revelation. There was something poetic about using the same setting where my family had explained why I needed to be more realistic about my dreams. I have some news to share, I announced, as Victoria served her famous pot roast, the one she always made when she wanted family gatherings to feel special and comforting. Harold looked up from cutting his meat, hope flickering in his eyes. "Did you hear back from Morrison and Associates? Tom said he put in a good word." "No, Dad. This is different." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a folder containing printouts of bank statements, contract agreements, and business registration documents. "I need to tell you about what I've been doing for the past 3 months." Carmen shifted in her seat, barely containing her excitement. She'd been anticipating this moment for weeks, knowing exactly how dramatically her family's understanding of reality was about to change. "What kind of news?" Victoria asked, though something in my tone must have warned her that this wasn't going to be a typical family update. I placed the first document on the table, my business checking account statement, showing a balance of $847,329.42. "I haven't been job hunting. I've been running a consulting business, Alexandria Rivers Environmental Consulting." The silence that followed was profound. Harold stared at the bank statement like it was written in a foreign language. Victoria's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "This is your account?" Harold's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, these are the earnings from my environmental consulting work over the past 3 months." Harold picked up the statement with trembling hands. $847,000. In 3 months. "Environmental consulting," Victoria repeated slowly. "The field we said was impractical." I nodded and placed the next document on the table, the Pacific Northwest Energy Consortium contract. "This is the project I just completed. My efficiency optimizations will save them $2.3 million annually while increasing their renewable energy output by 18%. Carmen couldn't contain herself anymore. "Tell them about the keynote speech, Lexi." "Keynote speech?" Harold looked up from the contract with bewildered eyes. "The International Renewable Energy Summit. In 3 weeks, I'll be delivering the keynote address about breakthrough innovations in wind energy optimization to an audience of 3,000 industry leaders from around the world." Victoria set down her fork entirely. I don't understand. How is this possible? You're 22 years old. I'm 22 years old with a degree in environmental engineering, an innovative approach to renewable energy systems, and apparently what the Department of Energy calls, quote, exceptional research capabilities. I placed another document on the table. They've approved $2.4 million in funding for my wind turbine research project. Harold was reading the Department of Energy letter, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been recognition. They're offering you $2.4 million for research you designed yourself. Research based on my undergraduate thesis. The one you said was too theoretical to have practical applications. The weight of that statement settled over the table like a heavy blanket. Victoria's eyes were filling with tears, though I couldn't tell if they were tears of joy or devastation. But you've been leaving every morning for job interviews, she said weakly. You've been coming home disappointed about entry-level positions that didn't work out. I've been leaving every morning for client meetings, site assessments, and project presentations. I've been coming home having earned more money in a single day than most entry-level positions pay in a month. Carmen pulled out her phone and showed them something she'd been saving for this moment. Tell them about the news articles, Lexi. I placed printouts of 3 business publication articles on the table. Millbrook Heights Business Journal named me Rising Entrepreneur of the Year. The State Environmental Council nominated me for their Innovation Award. Regional Energy Today called my work revolutionary. Harold was staring at the headlines. Local engineer transforms renewable energy efficiency. Millbrook Heights consultant saves municipal clients millions. Rising star in environmental innovation. He looked up at me. This is all about you? All about the work I've been doing while you thought I was failing to find appropriate employment. Victoria was crying openly now. Why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us worry about your future when you were already succeeding beyond anything we'd imagined? The question I'd been waiting for. The one that would let me explain exactly what their choices had cost them. Because, I said carefully, I needed you to understand what your assumptions about my capabilities actually meant. I needed you to see the consequences of dismissing my dreams as impractical while trusting Blake's business fantasies with your future. The mention of Blake's name was like a physical blow. Harold's face crumpled as the full scope of their misjudgment became clear. While Blake was burning through your money on contracts he was never qualified to pursue, I continued, I was actually securing municipal contracts, conducting energy audits, and building relationships with city officials who trust my professional recommendations. I placed my current project pipeline on the table. These are my confirmed contracts for the next 18 months. Total value, $2.1 million. Victoria stared at the numbers. $2.1 million in 18 months. In environmental consulting. The field you said would never pay well, would never offer job security, would never let me contribute meaningfully to solving real problems. Carmen leaned forward excitedly. Tell them about the Green Valley University project. Green Valley University hired me to conduct an energy audit of their entire campus. My recommendations will save them $340,000 annually while reducing their carbon footprint by 40%. The project fee was $180,000. Harold was looking back and forth between the documents and my face like he was trying to reconcile 2 different realities. You earned $180,000 for a single project? I earned $180,000 for a month of analysis that will save them millions over the next decade while helping them meet their sustainability goals. Victoria wiped her eyes with her napkin. And we told you to give up graduate school because environmental research was impractical. You told me to focus on marriage and babies because career success wasn't realistic for someone like me. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Because that's exactly what they were. Harold was reading through the contracts again, his hands shaking slightly. The Riverside Municipal Authority. That's the city government. I've been their environmental consultant for 2 months. My energy audits are saving them $180,000 annually. The city manager specifically requested that I oversee implementation of all my recommendations. But Blake said the municipal contracts were almost impossible to get without extensive experience and major financial backing. I smiled, and for the first time in months, it wasn't carefully calculated. Blake was right about the financial backing. Municipal governments want to work with consultants who have proven track records of delivering measurable results. What Blake didn't understand is that competence matters more than connections, and expertise matters more than equipment. Carmen pulled up something else on her phone. "Show them the expansion offer, Lexi." I placed the final document on the table, the letter from Meridian Energy Solutions, offering to acquire my consulting business. They want to buy my company for $3.2 million, cash. The number seemed to break something in Victoria. She put her head in her hands and sobbed. $3.2 million, Harold repeated numbly. They want to buy your 3-month-old business for $3.2 million. I'm not selling. My business is worth more than their offer, and I'm just getting started. Harold looked directly at me for the first time since I'd started revealing the truth. Lexi, I need you to understand something. While you were building this incredible business, we've been facing financial catastrophe because of our investment in Blake. We're going to lose our house, our retirement, everything. I know. You know? I've known for weeks. I know about the foreclosure timeline, the business loan default, Blake's disappearance, Uncle Robert's company liquidation. I know all of it. Victoria lifted her head. And you didn't tell us you could help? I wanted you to understand the full cost of your choices first. You didn't just steal my college fund. You dismissed my capabilities, my field, my dreams, and my future. You decided that Blake's delusions were worth more than my education. Harold was quiet for a long moment. And now you're successful enough to solve our problems, but angry enough that you might not. I looked around the table at my family, really looked at them, my parents who had raised me and supported my education until the moment it became inconvenient. Carmen, who had never doubted my potential. These people who loved me but had fundamentally misjudged everything about my capabilities and my chosen field. I'm not angry anymore, I said finally, but I am done being underestimated. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Harold stared at my business documents while Victoria dabbed at her eyes with increasingly soggy napkins. Carmen watched the scene unfold with the fascination of someone witnessing a historical moment. Finally, Harold cleared his throat. So what happens now? The question hung in the air like smoke. What happened now was entirely up to me, and we all knew it. For the first time in my life, I held all the power in my family's financial future. Now, I said, standing up and walking to the window that overlooked our backyard, we discussed terms. Terms? Victoria's voice was small. I turned back to face them, and I could see they were all bracing for what I might say next. You made a choice 3 months ago to freeze my college fund and give it to Blake. That choice has consequences. Some of those consequences you're already experiencing. Others we need to address. Harold leaned forward. Lexi, we know we made terrible mistakes. We misjudged everything. Your potential, your field, Blake's competence. We're sorry. We're deeply, profoundly sorry. Sorry isn't enough anymore, Dad. Sorry doesn't give me back the 3 months I spent pretending to struggle while building a business empire in secret. Sorry doesn't address the fundamental problem here. What fundamental problem? Victoria asked, though from her tone I suspected she already knew. The problem is that you didn't just make a financial mistake. You made a judgment about my worth, my capabilities, and my future. You decided that Blake's untested business fantasies were a better investment than my proven academic achievements and research potential. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a text message. Blake sent this yesterday, from his vacation in Colorado. Quote, Hey Uncle Harold, sorry things got complicated with the business. I'm exploring some new opportunities out here. Don't worry about the money. These things happen in entrepreneurship. Talk soon. The audacity of the message was breathtaking even to me, and I'd been expecting exactly this kind of response from Blake. Harold's face went through several color changes as he processed his nephew's casual dismissal of destroying his financial future. "These things happen in entrepreneurship," I repeated. "That's Blake's response to stealing your retirement and nearly bankrupting Uncle Robert." Victoria's tears had stopped, replaced by something that looked like anger. "He destroyed our lives, and he's treating it like a minor inconvenience." "Because he's never faced real consequences for his failures," I said. "And neither have any of you, when it comes to your assumptions about me." Carmen looked back and forth between us. "What kind of consequences are you talking about, Lexi?" I walked back to the table and sat down, placing my hands flat on the surface. "I'm talking about a complete restructuring of how this family makes decisions about money, about risk, and about whose judgment we trust." Harold's eyebrows rose. "Restructuring? I can solve your immediate financial crisis. I can pay off the business loan, catch up your mortgage payments, and ensure you don't lose the house. The question is whether you're willing to accept the conditions that come with my help." The room went dead quiet. Victoria's coffee cup rattled slightly against her saucer as she set it down. "What conditions?" Harold asked carefully. I opened my laptop and pulled up a document I'd been preparing for weeks, knowing this moment would eventually come. "First, all major financial decisions in this family go through me. No investments, no loans, no co-signing for anyone without my approval and analysis." Victoria started to protest, but I held up my hand. "Second, Blake is permanently cut off from any family financial support. No loans, no investments, no co-signing, no emergency funds. He's demonstrated that he's financially irresponsible and unwilling to face consequences for his failures." Harold nodded slowly. "That's probably wise." "Third, Uncle Robert's company gets restructured under my oversight. If you want the family construction business to survive, it operates according to my business plan and financial management." "You want to take over Robert's company?" Victoria asked. "I want to save it. Robert knows construction, but he clearly doesn't know business management or financial planning. I know both. Under my guidance, the company could actually secure those municipal contracts Blake was fantasizing about." Carmen leaned forward with interest. "How would that work?" "Municipal governments want to work with contractors who have proven track records and solid financial backing. I have relationships with 3 different municipal authorities who trust my professional judgment. I can recommend Robert's company for projects, provided they meet my quality and reliability standards." Harold was reading the document I'd prepared. "This gives you complete financial authority over family business decisions." "Yes, it does. Because my track record for business judgment is considerably better than anyone else's in this family." The statement was harsh, but it was also objectively true. In 3 months, I'd built a business worth millions, while they'd lost everything betting on Blake's incompetence. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "And if we don't agree to these conditions? Then you handle your financial crisis yourselves. You declare bankruptcy, lose the house, and start over with whatever you can salvage from the wreckage of your poor decisions." The words were cold, but I delivered them without emotion. This wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about ensuring that the mistakes of the past 3 months never happened again. Harold looked at Victoria, then back at me. "These conditions, they're essentially putting you in charge of the entire family's financial future. I'm putting the person with demonstrated business competence in charge of business decisions. That happens to be me." Carmen spoke up unexpectedly. "What about college for me? Would I need your approval to access education funding?" I smiled at my sister. "Your education funding is completely protected and guaranteed. In fact, I'm establishing a family education trust that will cover your full college expenses, including graduate school if you choose to pursue it. Education is always an approved investment." Relief flooded Carmen's face. She'd been worried that our parents' financial crisis would affect her own college plans. "There's one more condition," I continued. "Blake repays every dollar he owes, with interest. I don't care if it takes him 20 years. He doesn't get to walk away from this consequence-free while you lose your retirement. Victoria looked up sharply. How would we enforce that? He's in Colorado, and he's made it clear he considers this someone else's problem. I smiled, and this time it wasn't entirely pleasant. I have resources now. Legal resources, investigative resources, business connections across multiple states. Blake can run, but he can't hide from the consequences of his choices indefinitely. Harold was studying my face. You're serious about going after Blake legally. I'm serious about ensuring that actions have consequences. Blake destroyed your financial security while I was building mine. That imbalance needs to be corrected. Carmen looked excited. So Blake actually has to pay for what he did? Blake is going to learn that burning through other people's money carries a price tag. A very specific, very expensive price tag. Victoria was reading through my conditions document. These terms, they're actually quite fair, considering what you could demand. I'm not interested in punishing you, I said honestly. I'm interested in preventing future disasters and ensuring that this family's financial decisions are made by someone who actually understands business and risk assessment. Harold closed the document and looked directly at me. Before we agree to anything, I need to ask you something directly. Are you doing this to help us, or to prove a point about how wrong we were? The question was fair, and it deserved an honest answer. Both, I said. I'm helping you because you're my family and I love you, despite your terrible judgment about my capabilities. But I'm also proving a point about the consequences of underestimating people and dismissing their potential. Victoria reached across the table and took my hand. We did underestimate you, catastrophically, and not just your business potential. We underestimated your character, your intelligence, your determination. We treated you like a child who needed our guidance when you were already more capable than any of us. Harold nodded heavily. The practical daughter who would figure things out. We used that as an excuse to give your opportunities to someone else, without realizing that your ability to figure things out was actually extraordinary competence. I squeezed Victoria's hand. So are you ready to accept that your practical daughter is actually the family's best strategic thinker? Harold picked up a pen from the table. Where do I sign? As he signed the agreement that would restructure our family's entire approach to financial decisions, I realized that this moment represented more than just solving their immediate crisis. It represented a fundamental shift in how my family understood risk, competence, and the value of expertise. They'd learned, the hard way, that practical and profitable weren't always the same thing. And they'd learned that their daughter's dreams weren't impractical fantasies. They were business plans that they simply hadn't been qualified to evaluate. Now we'd find out if Blake was ready to learn some lessons of his own. The transformation of my family's financial situation began the next morning. I wired $225,000 from my business account to cover their outstanding debts, mortgage arrears, and provide a buffer for immediate expenses. But money was only the beginning of the reconstruction process. The real work started when I drove to Uncle Robert's house to discuss the future of his construction company. I found him in his garage, mechanically organizing tools that he'd managed to keep when the equipment was repossessed. He looked like he'd aged a decade in the past month. Alexandria, he said, looking surprised to see me, your dad told me about your business success. I have to say, I'm impressed and ashamed. Uncle Robert, we need to talk about your company. He laughed bitterly. What company? Blake destroyed everything I spent 20 years building. The contracts are gone, the equipment's been repossessed, and my reputation is shot because of projects we couldn't complete. I pulled out my laptop and showed him a spreadsheet I'd prepared. This is your company's financial position if we restructure immediately. Complete debt elimination, new equipment lease agreements, and 3 confirmed municipal contracts worth $1.8 million over 18 months. Uncle Robert stared at the screen. 3 municipal contracts? How is that possible? The city won't even return my calls after Blake's disasters. The city will work with you because I'm personally guaranteeing the quality of your work and managing the project oversight. My consulting relationship with Riverside Municipal Authority gives your company credibility it couldn't establish on its own." He sat down heavily on a workbench. "You do that after what Blake did with your college fund?" "I'm not doing it for Blake. I'm doing it because you actually know how to build things, and these communities need reliable contractors for infrastructure projects. But it comes with conditions." I outlined the restructuring plan. Robert would handle all construction operations while I managed business development, client relationships, and financial planning. All bids and contracts would be reviewed by me before submission. Blake would be permanently banned from any involvement in company operations. "You're essentially becoming my business partner," Robert said after reviewing the terms. "I'm becoming your business manager. You'll maintain majority ownership of the company, but all strategic decisions go through me. Think of it as having a business consultant who's personally invested in your success." The first test of our new arrangement came 2 days later when the Riverside Municipal Authority invited Robert's company to bid on a $400,000 public building renovation project. Under the old system, Blake would have inflated the budget and promised unrealistic timelines. Under my oversight, we submitted a meticulously researched bid that was competitive but realistic. We got the contract. Meanwhile, the reconstruction process extended to my parents' relationship with money and risk assessment. Harold had always prided himself on his business acumen from his engineering firm days, but he was struggling to accept that his daughter had become the family's primary financial strategist. "I keep thinking I should be giving you advice," he confessed during one of our weekly financial review meetings. "It feels wrong to have my 22-year-old daughter managing my retirement planning. Dad, your expertise is in engineering systems. Mine is in business systems and renewable energy markets. We both have valuable skills. They're just different skills." Victoria was adapting more easily to the new dynamic, perhaps because she'd never pretended to have business expertise. She threw herself into supporting my consulting work, helping with client communications and administrative tasks that freed me to focus on technical projects. "It's like having the world's most overqualified personal assistant," I joked to Carmen one evening. "Mom seems happier than she's been in months," Carmen observed. "I think she feels useful again." The most satisfying part of the reconstruction was watching Carmen's transformation. Freed from financial anxiety about her college future, she threw herself into studying environmental science with the kind of passion I recognized from my own undergraduate years. "I want to understand what you do," she explained as she pored over renewable energy textbooks. "Not because I want to copy your career path, but because I want to contribute something meaningful too." Within 6 weeks, Carmen had declared a major in environmental science with a focus on sustainable agriculture. Her enthusiasm reminded me why I had fallen in love with environmental engineering in the first place, the sense that our work could literally help save the world. But the most challenging aspect of our family's reconstruction was dealing with the Blake situation. His casual dismissal of the financial devastation he'd caused required a more targeted response than I'd initially planned. My private investigator located Blake in Aspen, Colorado, where he was working as a ski instructor and living in a resort employee dormitory. He'd apparently told his new friends that he was, quote, taking a break from the business world to find his true passion. The legal papers were served on a Tuesday morning while Blake was giving ski lessons to vacationing families. The lawsuit demanded full repayment of the $202,000 he'd cost my parents, plus interest, legal fees, and damages to Uncle Robert's business reputation. Blake called Harold within hours of being served, his casual confidence replaced by panic. "Uncle Harold, this is insane!" Blake's voice was high and strained through the speakerphone. "Lexi can't sue me for failed business ventures. That's just entrepreneurship. Sometimes things don't work out." Harold looked at me, and I nodded for him to continue. "Blake, you used other people's money to make promises you couldn't keep, then abandoned the consequences when things got difficult. That's not entrepreneurship. That's fraud. But I tried to make it work. The municipal contracts just didn't come through. The municipal contracts you applied for were rejected because you didn't meet the basic qualifications, I said, taking over the call. You knew you weren't qualified, but you used my college fund anyway. Lexi, come on, we're family. Family doesn't steal from each other and then flee to Colorado when the consequences arrive. Blake's tone shifted, becoming pleading. Look, I don't have $200,000. I'm working as a ski instructor. I make maybe $30,000 a year. Then you'll be making payments for a very long time, I replied calmly. The court order allows for wage garnishment and asset seizure if necessary. You can pay voluntarily or you can pay involuntarily, but you will pay. After hanging up, Harold looked at me with something that might have been admiration. You're not going to let him escape consequences, are you? Blake needs to learn that actions have prices, real prices, not just temporary inconvenience. The reconstruction process wasn't just about money and business operations. It was about rebuilding trust and establishing new patterns of decision-making. My parents had to learn to consult me before making financial commitments, which was an adjustment for people who'd been independent adults for 30 years. But they were learning. When Victoria wanted to invest in a friend's boutique clothing business, she brought me the business plan first. When Harold considered co-signing a car loan for a neighbor's son, he asked for my assessment of the risk. It feels strange, Victoria admitted, after I'd advised against the boutique investment due to poor market research and unrealistic revenue projections. But it also feels safer. Good judgment feels strange when you're used to making emotional decisions, I said. But emotional decisions are what got us into this mess. Uncle Robert's company was thriving under our new management structure. We'd completed 2 municipal projects, ahead of schedule and under budget, establishing a reputation for reliability that was generating referrals. Robert was happier than I'd seen him in years, freed from the stress of business development and able to focus on the construction work he genuinely loved. I should have done this years ago, he told me as we reviewed our project pipeline. I'm a builder, not a businessman. Trying to be both nearly destroyed everything. Carmen was excelling in her environmental science courses and had started attending industry conferences as my guest. Watching her network with renewable energy professionals and ask sophisticated questions about sustainable technology reminded me why education was worth fighting for. You know, she said after attending a symposium on solar energy storage, I'm starting to understand why you were so angry about them giving your college fund to Blake. It wasn't just about the money, it was about them not understanding the value of what you were trying to accomplish. Exactly. They saw graduate school as an expensive delay in starting real life, when it was actually the foundation for everything I've built. By the end of 3 months, our family had been completely restructured. Financial decisions were made based on evidence and analysis, rather than assumptions and emotional appeals. Uncle Robert's company was profitable and growing. Carmen was thriving in her studies with full financial support. My parents had learned to trust expertise over confidence. And Blake was making his first court-ordered payment of $847 per month, which would continue for the next 20 years. The reconstruction wasn't just about fixing the damage from their poor decisions. It was about building something stronger and more sustainable than what we'd had before. A family structure based on competence rather than tradition, evidence rather than assumptions, and accountability rather than enabling. It was exactly the kind of systematic improvement I specialized in with my consulting clients. And just like those projects, the results spoke for themselves. 1 year later, I stood at the podium of the International Renewable Energy Summit, looking out at an audience of 3,000 industry leaders from 67 countries. My keynote address, Breakthrough Innovations in Wind Energy Optimization, Real-World Applications and Economic Impact, had been scheduled for the conference's primetime slot. In the front row, my family sat together, Harold, Victoria, and Carmen, all dressed professionally and beaming with pride. Uncle Robert had flown in from a successful project completion in Denver, where his reconstructed company was now handling multi-state municipal contracts worth over $5 million annually. 18 months ago, I began my speech. Renewable energy efficiency was considered a theoretical field with limited practical applications. Today, the innovations we've implemented have saved municipal governments over $47 million in energy costs while reducing carbon emissions by 340,000 tons annually. The applause was thunderous. In the audience, I spotted Dr. Vasquez, who had been instrumental in launching my consulting career. Next to her sat Dr. Sarah Chen from Pacific Northwest Energy Consortium, whose recommendation had led to 3 additional major contracts. But the real breakthrough isn't in the technology itself, I continued. It's in proving that environmental sustainability and economic prosperity aren't competing priorities. They're complementary outcomes that reinforce each other when properly managed. After my presentation, the reception was a networking paradise. Venture capital firms wanted to discuss funding my expansion into international markets. Government representatives from 4 countries invited me to consult on national renewable energy initiatives. Academic institutions offered research partnerships and visiting professor positions. Carmen, who had spent the year excelling in her environmental science studies, moved through the crowd with increasing confidence. She'd become my unofficial research assistant, helping analyze data for my latest projects, while developing her own expertise in sustainable agriculture. That presentation was incredible, she said as we took a brief break from the networking circus. But I have to ask, do you ever think about what would have happened if Mom and Dad hadn't frozen your college fund? It was a question I'd considered many times over the past year. If they hadn't betrayed my trust, I probably would have gone to Stanford, earned my PhD, and spent years climbing the academic ladder. I might have made important discoveries, but I wouldn't have built a business empire. So in a weird way, their betrayal actually accelerated your success? I thought about the $4.7 million my consulting firm had generated in its first year, the Department of Energy research grants totaling $6.2 million, and the acquisition offers that now exceeded $15 million. Their betrayal forced me to prove my competence in the real world, instead of just academic settings. It made me stronger, more determined, and more strategic than I would have been otherwise. The evening concluded with an awards ceremony where I received the International Innovation in Renewable Energy Award. As I accepted the crystal sculpture and $100,000 prize, I saw Victoria wiping tears from her eyes in the audience. Later, at the family celebration dinner, Harold raised his wine glass for a toast. To Alexandria, who taught us that the most practical choice is often to support someone's highest ambitions, not their lowest expectations. To competence over confidence, Victoria added, and expertise over assumptions. Carmen grinned, to the most successful revenge story ever told. We all laughed, but there was truth in her observation. My success hadn't just vindicated my original dreams, it had exceeded them by orders of magnitude. The conversation turned to future plans. Uncle Robert was considering expanding his construction company into renewable energy infrastructure installation, leveraging our combined expertise to capture the growing market for solar and wind projects. With Alexandria's consulting relationships and my construction capabilities, he explained, we could become a full-service renewable energy implementation company. Design, installation, and ongoing optimization. Carmen had been accepted into graduate programs at both Stanford and MIT, with full funding for research in sustainable agriculture technology. I want to do for food production what you've done for energy efficiency, she said. Prove that environmental sustainability can be profitable. My parents had been transformed by their year of financial reconstruction. Harold had started consulting for engineering firms on project risk assessment, while Victoria had developed a side business helping small companies improve their administrative systems. They'd learned to build on their strengths rather than overextending into areas where they lacked expertise. The best part, Victoria said, is that we're actually contributing to solutions instead of just consuming resources. Our work matters now. But the most satisfying update came from an unexpected source. Blake called during our celebration dinner, and Harold put him on speakerphone at my request. "Uncle Harold, I wanted to update you on my situation." Blake's voice was notably different. Less confident, more mature. "I've been promoted to head ski instructor, and I'm starting a small equipment rental business on the side. The monthly payments to Alexandria are actually helping me learn to budget properly." "That's good to hear, Blake," Harold replied cautiously. "I also wanted to apologize directly to Alexandria. I spent a year being angry about the lawsuit, but I've realized that you were right to hold me accountable. I needed to learn that actions have consequences." I leaned toward the phone. "And what have you learned about business planning?" "That confidence isn't a substitute for competence. And that other people's money isn't gambling chips for my big ideas." Blake paused. "I'm actually thinking about taking some business courses. Real ones. Not just reading entrepreneur blogs." It was the closest thing to genuine accountability I'd ever heard from Blake. The legal pressure had apparently accomplished what family enabling never could. It had forced him to develop actual responsibility. After dinner, my family walked through downtown Denver, past the offices of 3 companies that now contracted with my consulting firm. The city had become a showcase for renewable energy efficiency, with municipal buildings operating at 89% efficiency and energy costs reduced by $2.8 million annually. "You know what I realized tonight?" Victoria said as we paused in front of a wind turbine installation I'd optimized. "We didn't just underestimate your potential. We underestimated the potential of environmental engineering itself. We thought it was academic theory, when it was actually practical economics. Every sustainable technology project generates measurable financial returns," I agreed. "The field isn't impractical. It's just complex enough that you need real expertise to navigate it successfully." Carmen pointed to the illuminated city skyline, powered increasingly by renewable sources. "So this is what the future looks like when someone actually listens to environmental engineers. This is what the future looks like when environmental engineers stop asking for permission and start building solutions," I corrected. As we walked back to our hotel, I reflected on the journey from that devastating graduation day breakfast to this moment of industry recognition and family reconciliation. The betrayal that had seemed like the end of my dreams had actually been the beginning of something larger than I'd originally imagined. Stanford would have given me excellent academic training, but building a business from nothing while proving doubters wrong had given me something more valuable: unshakable confidence in my own judgment and capabilities. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Morrison, the Department of Energy official overseeing my research grants. "Congratulations on tonight's keynote. We'd like to discuss funding your expansion into international renewable energy consulting. Initial budget, $25 million over 3 years." I showed the message to my family, who stared at the number in amazement. $25 million, Harold said quietly. "For work that we thought was too impractical to fund. For work that's now considered essential to addressing climate change," I corrected. "The world finally caught up to what environmental engineers have been saying for decades." Carmen grinned. "So what's next? Corporate takeover of the entire renewable energy industry?" I laughed, but the question wasn't entirely ridiculous. My consulting firm was now large enough to influence policy and market development across multiple countries. The technologies I'd optimized were being implemented globally. The research I'd conducted was shaping how governments approached renewable energy planning. "Next," I said, "we continue proving that the most practical thing you can do is solve problems that actually matter. And we keep building a future where competence is valued over confidence, where expertise guides decisions, and where environmental sustainability and economic prosperity work together instead of against each other." As we reached our hotel, I realized that my family's betrayal had ultimately become a gift. Not because the betrayal itself was valuable, but because it had forced me to discover capabilities I might never have developed otherwise. They'd frozen my college fund, thinking they were teaching me to be realistic. Instead, they'd taught me to be unstoppable. And sometimes, that's exactly the lesson the world needs. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.